Hi, and welcome to day 3. We ask for a word of wisdom from our Heavenly Father in Yeshua's name. So on day 3, we have, now in my opinion, it seems like Job 38 is a perfect parallel of the creation week, which is the recreation of the earth. The first 18 verses address the first creation of earth and its destruction and its subsequent recreation. So this video is going to discuss day 3, which in Job, if you want to look, it compares with verses 26 and 27. So in day 3 in Genesis, we have the reference from Genesis 1 verses 9 through 10. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. Now, since this is a recreation, you can see that in the fact that it says, "Let the dry land appear." Now, if it was the first time it was created, naturally land would be dry, as opposed to the ocean being wet. So the very fact that the word dry is here gives us an indication something else is happening, that the land is reappearing rather than just appearing for the first time. So we're going to examine that in the Hebrew because it will bear out in the Hebrew for us. And the gathering together of the waters, we're also going to examine the fact that in day 3, the only part that is discussed, as opposed to day 2, is the waters under the heavens. That's the oceans and the rivers. And why would this be discussed on day 3? Because we have a massive, basically the ice age is melting, and this is confirmed in science. And we will also examine some scientific articles to confirm the Bible. So, as I pointed out in the previous slide, we have the word dry describing land. This passage in Genesis, it should be noted, is not literal, just normal prose. It is poetry. And in poetry, we have definitely things that are used like imagery. So when you have, you will have actual creative acts by God, but the language itself is going to be poetic, like saying a day with the Lord. It's a 1,000-year period. It's a long period. So that is why the phrasing here seems like it is a literal 24-hour day, when in fact it is a day with the Lord. That is poetry being used by Moses, as it is also used in Psalm 90. But in this slide, I'm going to discuss the word dry and how it is used. It goes without saying that land is dry, but the image being drawn to our attention in this poetic passage is that the land is newly dried up and appearing for the first time. So we have the Hebrew word Yabesh, which is the Strong's Concordance number 3001. Kal is the form of the verb. It's the most basic Hebrew form. When you read the passage and the definition of the Strong's Concordance, it says to be dry, dried up without moisture. A, of bread, B, of ground lacking rain, and C, of earth, specifically plants, after the flood. Okay, the word is used in Genesis 8:14. Compare, it says karev, Hebrew 27:17, which is used figure, and then we'll compare that later. Okay, but I'm just going to go ahead and read the rest of the definition. Figuratively, the word yabesh is used figuratively. That's what FIG means in the Strong's Concordance. Of tree. So of roots of the wicked. Okay, so what's happening here is the overthrow of Satan, when God overthrew Satan, he literally caused a literal flood upon the earth and destroyed like all life that was on the earth. And this would basically cause anything that Satan had built on the earth, any life that he had directed or poisoned, or any structures or anything. He basically is destroying the system that Satan had built on the earth. So this day, although is a literal creative act by God, taking place in a literal day of God, which is 1,000 years, is also poetic in the fact that that time, that earth, Satan had been overthrown. So we're going to further examine this word yabesh. It describes what happened to the prior plant foliage. And you'll see that it's of the plants of the earth in the Strong's Concordance, and the inhabitants that were on the earth. Now these weren't humans. It wasn't man. It was angelic people. So the angels, the 1/3 of the angels from Revelation 12 that fell with Satan, they were wicked, and they were put in punishment, basically, when the earth was overthrown. The second word, karev, describes the state of the land itself as a result of the floodwaters upon the land itself. As in Noah's story, the land was destroyed. So the first word, yabesh, refers to the plants. The second word, karev, refers to the land and how it would be destroyed. So in Noah's case, God said, I'm going to cause it never ever to rain here ever again on this location on earth. And it didn't. It became a desert called the Tarim Basin, which is a moving sands desert, one of the most devastating, difficult, death-defying deserts of the entire planet. Okay, so when you look at 21,000 years ago, what was the earth like? Now, I believe since the day 3, which would have been about, 12,000 years ago, God said, let the dry land appear. Okay, so the dry land in America 21,000 years ago was covered by huge sheets of ice. And when you look at these skylines, you see that's Toronto, this is Chicago, this would be America. So it's a shorter sheet of ice over America, but sheets of ice nonetheless. So the land was not seen. And on day 3, God said, let this dry land that's hidden under sheets of ice appear. And it would take thousands of years for it to melt, but it would melt. So if we look at this scientific article I found from Purdue University, the article is titled, Ancient Glaciers Still Affect the Shape of North America. I find this fascinating. We already know that parts of North America are slowly rising due to an effect we call post-glacial rebound. Okay, so these heavy ice sheets here, when they melted, caused the land to appear or come upward. He said, quote, the weight of the ice sheets that once covered the region was large enough to deflect the surface beneath it, lowering its elevation. Now that the ice sheets are gone, the land is recovering slowly, so slowly, that it is still rising today, 10,000 years later. Fascinatingly, this lines up perfectly in the timeline to day 3, when dry land would appear. So now we're going to look at how the waters are gathered. Now this is still day 3. In Genesis 1:10, the dry land, earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. Now, we already have seas in day 2. But what's interesting here is that there is a massive melting of the ice sheets, and this would cause freshwater flood to fill the North Atlantic. It would shut down the ocean currents and convey warmer water from the equatorial region northward. And this is exactly what we need. We need the warm water to go northward. And so what God is doing here on day 3 is he's causing the waters to be gathered into the ocean. And this would cause massive changes upon the planet. As you can see on this map, this is an Ice Age map of the continents. And if you look at North America, it has a very odd shape. It looks like the ocean is very low. But when that water came out of the massive ice sheets on North America, it would go into the Atlantic Ocean. This is the process that was happening on day 3, which would change the shape of the, quote, dry land. So now we have the shape of the land as it is today, which is all the ice has already melted. And then I've shown this slide in other videos. Day 3, the land surfaced. And again, this kind of shows the same thing, that the glacial ice, the glacial dam collapsed in what is now northern Idaho. There's all kinds of glacial lakes that formed in North America. This is just one of them, and it created massive water flooding out and causing these boulders to be placed where they are today, and forming Lake Missoula. So as in day 3 in Genesis, we're going to also look at verses 11 through 13, because not only do we have the ice sheets melting, causing the water to flood into the Atlantic Ocean and come off of the earth, giving more dry land, but we have verses 11 through 13 where God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth." And it was so. So many of the plants upon the earth would have to be planted that wouldn't need a farmer, that would just be able to grow when the seed falls from the tree and then grows in the ground. This is basically North America, which was covered in ice, would need a recreation of plants upon it specifically, and also in Europe. So we're going to look at that on this 3rd day. So another thing that's interesting about day 3 as we study it is this particular flower. Now the scientists call the time period in which I'm ascribing day 3 to the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas is one of the most well-known examples of abrupt change. Note that this is a quote from Noah, and they're calling it abrupt change. This near glacial period is called the Younger Dryas, named after a flower that grows in cold conditions and that became common in Europe during this time. Of course it became common in Europe during this time because that's when God created it and planted it in that particular area. The end of the Younger Dryas, about 11,500 years ago, was particularly abrupt. So there was a great lowering of temperatures, and then there was abrupt spike of temperatures. Oh, I see, I got that backwards. The temperatures were Ice Age-like, and they went down. And when all the Ice Age water went into the ocean, it caused it to dip down again into cold Ice Age. And that's why the Younger Dryas is marked by cold, warm, and then cold again. So I have discussed this chart before. It's my 14,000 year chart. Basically, day 1 is when the sun's light began to melt the Ice Age abruptly. Day 2 is when God caused the wind belts to establish a rain system upon the earth, and it was not good because it was basically storms all over the earth. And day 3 that we're discussing right now is when the land would come out from under the giant ice sheets. They were melting into the ocean and changing the boundaries of the land. And scientists do confirm that this happened about 10,000 years ago. I have 10,000 BC there. So let me just add one more graphic here. And it'll show you the 12,000 before present to 11,000 before present is day 3. And the scientists do confirm that that's when the water was melting from the glacial ice sheets and causing massive flooding from different lakes and changing the ocean currents. It's so fascinating to see what is recorded in science being confirmed in the Bible perfectly. And these 1,000-year periods, not only do they match the Genesis timeline, but they also match from the time that Adam was created in the Septuagint, 5,000 BC, 1,000 years before most commonly thought. And these timelines do match up. So the flood would be 3,000 BC according to the Septuagint chronology. And it lines up with the same day 3 when land came and the waters receded. So I found that quite interesting that those two lined up. So in day 3 we have seed bearing seed. And in order for seed to be bearing seed, you would have to have rain, because rain is obviously what waters the ground and the seeds so that they can grow. In Job, in day 3, it says to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is. Because there are areas on the earth where there is no man to plant the seed and to cause it to grow. So on the wilderness wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth. So you would have most of North America and Europe that there is no man, and they need the seed to grow. So the Lord causes the rain to come down on the newly sprung up land that had formerly dry plants on it, all withered up. Now in the Septuagint, it also emphasizes the fact that there is no man, and that there is a wilderness in which no person belongs in it, in order to nourish the desolate and the uninhabitable, and in order to produce sprouting grass. So you would have all of the plants that can sprout themselves without the help or the aid of a farmer. This is just basically individual areas and grasslands and trees and all kinds of plants. Now, in summary, we have the progress of recreation basically to make everything habitable. On day 1, the earth tilt changes and the ice begins to melt. The scientists confirm it was abrupt, and it must have been some kind of, or they call it orbital change. They don't understand exactly what that could be. And then day 2, we have the 7 wind belts on the earth are established. Okay, you got 3 above the equator and 3 below the equator. I'm not going to draw them all, but they're there. And the ocean currents were stopped and restarted, and this had to do with the ice melt, which is more a day 3 thing. But basically, extreme weather was formed in day 2. And then we have 13,000 to 12,000 before present for day 2. And day 3, we have glacial dams break and water flows into the oceans, causing a short cold stint. And the younger dryas, the beautiful little flowers that the scientists have assigned to this time period. And there is rain on day 3, and there was rain on day 2, because along with thunderstorms, they were established on day 2. And day 2 was not declared good, if you notice that in the reason the earth is called dry on day 3 is because all the plants were withered and dead from the frozen ice sheets, heavy ice sheets that had buried the land. See the Hebrew word yabesh, or dry, which is the Hebrew meaning of dry, withered, and the condition of the plants on the earth after a flood. Hence, at a prior earth age, or destruction of a prior earth age. Now that the land was cleared of ice and freshwater floods, God will rejuvenate the self-propagating plants. This is important with rain There's no man there yet, but there is rain. Whereas Job says no man is. This provision for the plants still exists today. So the conclusion to all of this is that day 3 begins by addressing only the water under the heavens, not the clouds and the storms that would be forming from day 2. They are a precedent or a requirement before day 3. You have to have rain in order for plants to grow. It's the logical thing. This water removal exposes, I should say ice dam removal, exposes dry land with withered plants on day 3. The sea boundaries are changed, forming the seas today, as you saw in that one map I showed. And scientists confirmed that this actually happened. And the continents are still rebounding today from the ice melt. So we have a proof that the ice age did happen, and it lines up perfectly. And the occurrence of the melt of the ice age being abrupt shocks scientists. They don't understand it. They call it abrupt. They say suddenly. They don't know why the earth just suddenly changed. Plants that can survive with seed in itself were recreated, mainly because there was no man around to plant them and care for them. And so that's my conclusion of day 3. Really important to understand that there is rain there, because when you get into Genesis chapter 2, it talks about how there was no rain in the Garden of Eden. And I'm going to address that, I guess, later on when I get to that creation, which is it's basically a very specific part of the earth. Obviously, only had two people in it, and it had not stormed there. My opinion, that's what it meant when it said there had been no rain there, no flood, no highly destructive, but very beautiful. That on day 3, I believe that all the plants that would begin the Garden of Eden were starting to grow. All the ones that had seed-bearing seed in itself. And that's important, because when God created Adam, he also created plants that were of the field. And so that would be a different, specific, very specific creation for a very specific man. So that's my conclusion of day 3 of God's recreation of the earth.